Appreciate that. I'm Andrew Cook. I am a full-time artist and I work with a number of brands to help promote and talk about their products. So today, all of you know we're going to be playing with some Sennelier watercolor with some Fabriano paper. So I'll get into a lot more detail about those products, about this Raphael brush. First, let me tell you a little bit about where I am. I have my degree in art and art history. I travel around quite a bit. I'm based in California, but today I was just at an event here in outside of Seattle. So I am at a friend's art studio on Whidbey Island in Puget Sound. And just so if you see the artwork behind me, I'll give her a little shout out. Her name is Meredith Cannon, and she's letting me share her studio today with you all and hang out and use her space. So I really appreciate her for that. Uh, I have a little bit of a cold, so apologize if I'm a little stuffy today, but forgive me. Let me talk a little bit now. We could switch to the overhead camera and we'll dive right into it and start having some fun. So Lauren mentioned that we have that kit that many of you I hope received and are able to play with. It's got the Sennelier dot card, which I think is really fantastic. It's a new thing that's available from Sennelier. I haven't been able to share these with people in the past, and I'm sure for those of you who have it in front of you, you've noticed that it's bigger than just a dot out of a tube of paint. So Sennelier, because of the composition of their paint, can't squeeze tube paint onto a card and utilize that to share with y'all. So these are made like tiny little watercolor pans. Uh, and then glued onto this paper. So you're actually getting a really significant amount of paint. And because of that, instead of bringing the tube paint or the pan paint out and playing with it for this event, I decided I can show that we can use just this dot card and we can achieve a significant amount of painting. So we'll play with that and talk a little bit more about that as we go. And then you have this pochette of Fabriano paper, and in there is the Fabriano Artistico in every surface that is available. So you've got your hot press, your cold press, your rough in traditional white, and then you've got your hot press, your soft press, your cold press, and your rough in extra white. So for the sake of today's uh, playtime, uh, you can really choose what you want. You can touch and feel, see what is the most interesting to you, and select that. And if you start working on it and you realize this is too textured or not textured enough, that's the great thing about having all of these in front of you is you can just snag another one. You can even start sketching on multiple sheets at once if you want, and you have the space available, and see which one really is gonna come out to be your best friend. So I like them all, and I'll talk a little bit about why in just a few minutes as we're going. You've got a Raphael imitation. It says on the brush, it'll say Raphael imitation Kolinsky. It is the Raphael Stradivarius. It's a synthetic Kolinsky brush that has the ability to achieve all the things we'd expect out of a natural Kolinsky brush. And then one thing I actually forgot to bring with me, but I'll talk a little bit about it, is you have that Cretacolor water-soluble graphite pencil in front of you too. One of my favorite products out there. It is just so buttery, and the graphite is so creamy under the brush. I wish I could show it today, but you'll be able to experiment with it, play with it yourselves. Uh, just really fun to use and completely dissolves underwater. So it's if you sketch with it dry on the paper is how I would recommend starting out, sketching dry, and then using your wet brush or even just going straight in with the watercolor, you'll see that that graphite just dissolves and becomes a part of the paint. So with that, let me open some of these things up. I am going to start with Fabriano Artistico Soft Press, and I'm going to flip over the sheet that is in that pack so that I have a full blank sheet in front of me. I'm going to move the other stuff out of the way. Actually, I'm going to move all this other stuff out of the way so that we have a little bit of a clearer space to look at while we play. Let's see if I can do this without knocking things over. One moment. A little shaky for a second, which is fine. All right, perfect. Round table. Make sure this is somewhere in the best part of the shot. All right, and then I'm going to open up the Sennelier So first, let's talk a little bit about the Sennelier paint while I'm opening it. I hope many of you are experienced with some watercolor or are interested in being experienced with some watercolor, and hopefully that's why you're here. So Sennelier has been making paint since 1887, and they are really experienced with watercolor. A lot of people think they began with oil paint, but watercolor was really the first paint that they started manufacturing in 1887 when they opened the Sennelier store in Paris. And so you'll notice from the color range, this whether we're looking at this card and just these 10 colors, or if you're looking at the full range of 98 colors, Sennelier watercolor has a very impressionist inspired color palette. So with this, one of the first things I like to do when I get a sample card like this is to just wet the paint and kind of dab it out so I can see. Let's get it over here. So I can see the color coming off of it. Now with Sennelier, you'll notice one thing is different from other brands. I'm just barely, this is out of the package. I've never gotten it wet before. And you see the colors just immediately coming off of those. And that is because Sennelier is made of pure pigment from all over the world, combined with gum arabic. You've probably, if you're a watercolor artist, you've heard the word gum arabic before. If you read the labels on food, you've probably seen gum arabic or acacia gum. It's a water-soluble tree sap resin. So it is the primary binder for most watercolor. And Sennelier adds to that honey. So the pigments from all over the world, the gum arabic comes from acacia trees in Sudan, and the honey comes from 14 beehives they have at the factory in France. And all this paint is made in the Sennelier factory in Brittany, so northern France. Really beautiful area. Lots of flowers, so the honey is, the bees love being there, very prolific. Now, why would we add honey to the paint? The first thing is you notice how quickly the color came out of that. I didn't have to mist it. I didn't have to scrub at it. The the tip of my brush is still, I mean, this is a used brush, but the tip of my brush is still fine. It's not really frayed or damaged from me having to scrub to get that paint activated. And that is because of the honey. The honey is hygroscopic, which means it absorbs moisture from the atmosphere, and it makes the paint really easy to re-wet. So even if you're painting with the Sennelier tubes, if you work out of tubes or if you want a significant amount of this paint, then you're going to order the tubes, squeeze it into a palette. You can let that dry over the course of multiple days, or just, from your painting session that day, if you have a little dab, it'll dry up, and it's going to reactivate with the most ease that you can probably find in any paint anywhere. So since I don't have that graphite pencil with me, I'm going to toggle over on my computer so I can't see my screen real quick, but I'm going to look at that reference image that you have in front of you. Now, this is a bag of garden bulbs. We're in spring. I've been collecting different bulbs for my garden, planting at different times. All the bulbs in this reference image, as you can imagine, I did this a little while ago, those are all in the ground, and I'm starting to see them popping out now. Uh, they're going to become some beautiful lilies for the most part is what I chose there. There's a couple of tiger lilies. There's some really beautiful, beautiful flowers that I'll be able to use for my next painting, hopefully. Now with this, I'm gonna choose my orientation. For this one, I'm gonna choose a vertical, which looks like we can get most of that in the shot there. And I've got my colors. So if I had my graphite pencil, which I'll use Payne's Gray because I don't have my graphite pencil with me, then I'm just gonna choose the part of that image that I want to start to pull most. And I'm not going to line it up the same way as it is in that photograph. I'm going to pick and choose the areas really because this is going to become an abstract composition. I just want to use that reference image as inspiration for what I'm gonna create. So in this case, I really don't want it too central. So if I'm just gonna make some marks, let's say I want a dark spot there. So I'm going to start the top left corner of that bag where it's really dark. I'm going to start that right there. So that'll all be covered up, right? I can sketch that bag in, and I'm going to keep it real loose. You can start wherever you want with whatever part you want. Doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine. I am going to leave a lot of white space on this paper. Lately I've been alternating between leaving virtually no white space on the paper and leaving quite a bit of white space on the paper. And that way I can choose what I want to do with that negative space a little later. So bags can come here. And this is going to be my light area right in here. And I'm keeping this Payne's gray somewhat light in the light areas. Now, if you guys have any questions as we go, just let me know. And as I'm sketching this, I'm not keeping exactly to the image. I'm going to keep it really just kind of inspired by that image. I'll talk a little bit about the paper as we go as I'm sketching, since you know that I'm not keeping it directly to the image. If you wanted to keep it more image oriented, you could use some graphite transfer paper to transfer out the bolder areas of the image and still use that as an inspiration. Or you can really focus in on some specific details if you wanted to use that transfer method. But I prefer to really keep it loose, keep it open, and draw in those bulbs. So the paper I chose is the Fabriano Artistico in the soft press. Now Fabriano Artistico is 100% cotton, no optical whiteners. This packet has all 140 pound, but it also comes in 300 pounds. It is just a beautiful paper to work on. Fabriano's been making paper since 1264, so they are 761 years old this year. And they are really, really well practiced in making these papers.
Andrew, Jamie is asking, what is soft press?
Great question. So with Fabriano Artistico, we get 4 different surfaces, which is really unique in the world of watercolor paper. We get the hot press, which is smooth. Think of hot like the paper's been ironed, right? And then we get cold press, which is the most common. You'll see in your Plaza stores, you'll see a lot of cold press papers. You'll see online, you'll see a lot of artists using cold press. It is the most common watercolor paper that artists are going to use. Now with Fabriano, with most brands, we also have rough, which is a very rough textured surface, really great if you're using a lot of granulating pigments. But Fabriano also has that soft press. And soft press is made to be in between hot and cold press. It's got a really subtle, if I hold this up to the camera, you guys have this in front of you, but it's got a really subtle surface, almost like a fabric. So you can get really fine detail, or you can get some really nice granulation. So hot press, a lot of people go to their hot press. For any of you who've started with it, you may be experiencing this now if you're using it for this project and you haven't used it before. A lot of people will start with hot press thinking they're going to get really great detail out of their hot press paper. And hot press is extremely smooth. It's the hot is the ironing process at the end of the paper making. It's put between 2 hot steel rollers that kind of, it's like they call it calendaring, but it's ironing it flat. And with hot press, because it's so smooth, the paint is going to be a little unpredictable. It doesn't have the surface tension that's holding it into the little divots of the paper as much, so it might roll around. 2 layers of paint might touch and then start to bleed into each other. With soft press, we can get a lot of those details that we really love, but because it's got a light surface texture, it's going to hold exactly where we're trying to get it to hold. So again, if I hold this up, show it to you. Like right over here, you can see, let's see if I can get it to, there we go. You can see how sharp those edges are staying. It's not trying to move anywhere. Even at a tilt, the water is moving to the edge where I did my wash, but it's not moving beyond that. With hot press, because it's so smooth, you might see it start to drip. I could get this to drip, but it takes some actual like percussive movement to get it to drip. I have to whack it. Which I kind of like how that turned out. Uh, so hot press, a little less predictable. Soft press, you can get these details, but it is predictable. You can make it predictable. Uh, so I have a bulb here, and a bulb here, and a little bit of a bulb over here. And I'm looking at that image right now and just adding in some of my darks. Now, one interesting thing to note, if you want some fun trivia, is cold press is the most common, right? Hot press is very common for illustrators still, people using fine line pens. Uh, if you're in the UK, if you're traveling abroad and you want to buy paper, you'll see hot press and it'll be called hot press. If you're shopping for Fabriano, you'll see soft press, or you won't see soft press. I'm sorry, it's only available in the United States. Uh, but you will see cold press, but it may not be called cold press. In the UK, they're a little bit more literal maybe. They'll have hot press paper and not paper. Now that hot press, remember I said it goes through steel rollers at the very end that iron it smooth. So in the UK, they'll say cold press, or they'll say hot press paper and not. Cold cold press is just called not because it is not hot pressed at the end. So fun little piece of trivia. If you see not, you're getting cold press paper. And that's just NOT. Now I'm going to start to think about some of the color I want to add. And I may want to let some of these areas dry. So I'm going to go down into to add color into these areas that I have not I've not touched for a while, that I didn't add all this saturation. And if I'm looking at this paper bag, goes down over here, then I'm going to start to think about some of the warmer colors I want from that light really shining on the side. So maybe I'll reach over for some of this Naples yellow deep, which is a little more opaque than the other watercolors that we have sitting in front of us. And I'm gonna really get some of that down in here. I'm gonna cover up a little bit of that area that I already sketched on. Start pulling some of that Naples yellow warmth. Add a little water to it, get some really thin washes. Now Sennelier makes 98 colors, but from this palette that we have in front of us, I love showing that just with 10 colors, even less, if we had less than 10 colors, if all you had was opera rose, phthalo blue, and lemon yellow, you could achieve just a tremendous amount from just those colors. Now, I'm getting a little bleed there on the edge because it was still wet. I'm okay with that because I'm keeping it loose. I'm perfectly happy with that. Now, I had the paper folding down in here, so I'm going to go back in and add a little bit more that gray just to treat it kind of like a little bookmark. Remind me that that's dark down there. And then the paper bag is brown, right? So I'm going to grab some of this Van Dyke brown. Again, a very opaque color, so I can dilute just a little bit over here on the side, add a little more water to it, and grab just a tiny bit of that brown. Start thinking about what that's going to look like down here. And if I'm just thinking about it, I might even just cross hatch out some of those colors. Those colors are going to look good there. And then I can take my brush just with wet water, no color on it, see? And I can start to blend Just little circular motions is the way I like to do it when I'm keeping it so light. Blend some of this color out. And it's okay that it's pulling in some of that Payne's gray because we're pretty dark down there. We're gonna have to add a few layers anyway. And I'm gonna want that Payne's gray to really kind of saturate into it, bleed into it. If you look at the first few paintings from me doing this painting, I did it a few different ways. It showed up in the promotional imagery. So we can do it any way we want, but I really like to take these light washes and let those kind of help me dictate what's going to happen. Start to see some of that brown show up in there from the paper bag. And my goal is really at the end of this, I want there to not be a definitive bag of bulbs that people see, but I want it to kind of feel like a bag of bulbs. I want it to feel like springtime. I want it to feel like nature. I want it to feel like something that's alive or that's going to come to life. So I can keep letting these areas dry as I go, moving around the painting. Then the driest area I see now is right in here in this main bulb portion. And that bulb has a lot of little segments to it. Almost looks like a really luminous bulb of garlic that's kind of started to grow. It's got some pinks, it's got some greens, some yellows. So I'm going to take this Chinese orange color here. This Chinese orange, this is my favorite Sennelier color. It's most people's favorite Sennelier color. In fact, it's because I do a lot of these events, a lot of in-person events. I talk a bit about this color, and Chinese orange has become Sennelier's #1 watercolor color for people just trying it out, just starting. They'll dive into this Chinese orange because it's so unique. And again, it's okay because shadows, this is all three-dimensional. Blend in some of this gray. We can go back in later and I can do some easy lifting on most of these colors. Keep it really luminous right there. If I don't like that, I can always take my paper towel, do some lifting. We'll do that in a few minutes. I'll show you how I do that. Now I'm using the same brush for all of this because you all have the one sample brush that you received. Beautiful, beautiful brush. Raphael is an amazing company. Now, if I was in my studio, I might be using 4, 5, 6 brushes, but I don't need to, right? If I'm traveling, which I am, I can have just one really good brush with me that caters to the size of the paintings I want to be working on. And I'll often do that when I'm traveling. I'll take just one brush or one travel brush. It's usually a smaller brush, so because I can take things like paper towels, I can take things like Q-tips, I can change up what I'm doing based on where I am. You don't always have to have a bunch of brushes as long as you have a good brush. So for instance, I'm getting a little bit, where did I put my paper towel? It's in my pocket. I'm getting a little bit of more bleed through than I would like. You know, I said it's okay if it bleeds. That's totally true. But you're the boss of your painting. I'm the boss of my painting, and I'm deciding that this time it's just a little more than I want right there. So I'm going to take my paper towel and I'm going to stop it. And you see it just goes back to white. So I talked about over here, if it started to get a little bit too luminous or a little bit too gray, then we could do the same thing. I can take just a wet brush, see, just wet brush. I'll do it again, get a little more water. And I can add that water here. And you see I'm just adding it in this spot. And then I can take that paper towel and I can lift that area out. So I get a lot of color coming up off the paper. Fabriano Artistico is really good for lifting. Sennelier watercolor, because of that honey content, really good for lifting. So we can really use that to our advantage. I'm going to set that aside for just a moment. Go back in with that orange. Very little, mostly water. And then I'm going to try and blend again, but make it lighter.
Hey, Andrew.
Yeah,
Question about lifting.
sure.
If you're lifting, is there a time frame you need to work in? Does it need to still be damp, or can it be totally dry and you go back and lift?
You can do it either way. You'll get a different response based on when you lift and what color you're lifting too. If I have something like, uh, actually, let's see. Good question. So I'm gonna grab another sheet of paper over here, and I'm gonna do a couple of things that we can watch as we play. I'm gonna grab some of this phthalo turquoise, which is phthalo blue and phthalo green. Both of those are very staining colors. Okay. Now, staining means that as it sits, soaks into the paper, it's exactly what you think. It's harder to get off. Now I'm doing a little wash of it. And in just a minute, as it dries, I'll do a lift while it's wet, and we can come back to it a little later and do a lift once it's more dry. I'm gonna do the same thing with Van Dyke Brown, which is primarily a synthetic iron oxide color, which means it's a dirt color, basically. And it can be a little easier to lift, generally speaking. And so we'll look at how that responds as well. Now, just for fun, let's pick another color like that Chinese orange I told you is my favorite. We'll grab a bunch of that. And it's a more transparent color than that Van Dyke Brown. Slightly less staining, theoretically, than that phthalo turquoise. But remember, there's so many things that impact the way your paint dries, how wet your paint is uh, regionally. So one thing that I can't take into account while I'm painting today is I have never painted on Whidbey Island before. I don't know what our humidity level is or how that's going to impact my painting. And I'm okay with that. I like not having to think too much about those things. But some artists are really, really involved in making sure that they have a constant humidity, especially with things like watercolor, because they're doing a lot of lifting. Uh, they're keeping things really in control. I like to keep things a little less in control. So, in fact, go back in while I'm letting that set up a little bit. I'm gonna go back in here and start to work on my bag again. Grab a little bit of that Van Dyke Brown. Just kind of loop it in here. Now, because this, I lifted a little earlier, some of that Naples yellow. Now I can take, that's a really, really bright spot. It's actually so bright that it's not even white anymore. It's yellow, right? Like our eye's gonna perceive that as just this glow. So I'm gonna add that glow in there. I'm using quite a bit of paint there. I'm not doing as thin of a wash as I've been doing in other areas. But while I have that on my brush, I also know that I have this other big bulb over here that's much more yellow. So I'm gonna tie that in at the same time. Compositionally, that'll help that I have the yellow in more than just one spot. Where else might I want that yellow? Let's add a little bit of that yellow while it's a little dirty. Down along here. Because down along that edge, we have a little bit more. Now remember, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know as we're going. I think I've got a little hint of that yellow maybe in here. Actually, that looks a little more white. So let's use that yellow I just put down as my way to lift just a bit. So that's a little more white right there. And then I'll go back in with the yellow. Now that we pulled some of that muddiness away, that yellow is gonna sit on there just a little better. Now I'm gonna come back in with my Van Dyke brown. Start adding in maybe a little bit more of the darker areas of that bag. This I think from here up, I'm gonna add a lot more of that Payne's gray. I'm just gonna cross hatch a little bit some of this Van Dyke brown. Keep it kind of loose, kind of sketchy. Not gonna do as much of a wash now. We'll let that set up. So now let's come back to this little experiment we're doing over here. And I've got my paper towel. I'm gonna wrap my paper towel around my finger, just so you guys know exactly how I'm doing this little experiment. And while this is still wet, I'm gonna just draw a little line. Everybody see that? I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna get a clean spot on this paper towel. Draw a little line. So it's still so wet, it lifted, but it's still bleeding into that wet area. This is a little more dry. Let's see if it does it. Oh, this dried a little quicker on me. So I couldn't lift yet. But it's still wet. Water, still wet down here. So we can see if I just blot it, that lifted great. So as it's wet, you can do a little lifting. And then as it sets up, you can do more. If I want controlled lifting, you see I'm not able to do that. But if I want to blot the general area, then I'm getting a lot of lifting. So that's the answer on the wet lifting. Now let's let that dry, and we'll come back and talk more about that. So Raphael, since we talked a little about the brushes, let me go back to the brushes again. Raphael's been making brushes in France since 1793. So they're the oldest artist brush manufacturer in France. And now they have their factory still in France, in Brittany, but they've also got a factory on the island of Mauritius, which is its own democratic nation. It's off the coast of Madagascar. Beautiful facility there. People love to work there. It's just a great community for artisanal products like brushes. Beautiful area. At some point, I hope to visit Mauritius. It's just lovely. I'm gonna add in a lot more of this Payne's gray here. Now I've kept the palette on this really neutral so far. But as time goes on, I know we don't have it all day for me to go back and forth and layer. So I'm going to look at that and squint at the source image a little bit and try to imagine if that was right in front of me right now with that bright warm light on it, what color would I be seeing in this shadow? And I've got plenty of warmth in there already from this Van Dyke brown, a little bit of coolness from this Payne's gray, and the shadow looks pretty warm to me. But I want to keep a lot of contrast between all these warm areas that I'm going to be creating and the shadows. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a little bit of this phthalo blue. I'm going to add a little bit of this coolness down here, just so that my shadows become cooler than they were in real life. I want them to really kind of sink back for me. And we know that cool colors are going to sit back further. Warm colors are going to come forward at us a bit. So this is almost like if I were to take that that image and just tip it towards me a little bit. That's what the effect that I'm going to get, I hope. So all my shadows, I'm going to add in some of that phthalo blue. Keep it really fun, really light. A little more of that phthalo blue there. Now, one other thing I want to note, just because I don't know if you've worked on watercolor paper before, you know, we call it watercolor paper, but you can use watercolor paper for acrylic, you can use it for watercolor, you can use it for gouache, you can use it for drawing. This is really just kind of a multi-use paper for any media you want to use on it. Watercolor paper can be a lot of fun. And in the case of Fabriano Artistico, you may notice already that it can take a lot of abuse. I'm layering water on it over and over and over again, kind of scrubbing with this little brush. I'm getting great effect without really destroying the paper. Now down in here, this bulb, I don't know if you can see it on my drawing. There's a little curve right here. There's a bulb down there, kind of in the shadows. And it's really glowing out of that left edge. So I'm going to take some of this quinacridone red, primary red. I'm going to make it glow just a little bit right there. A bit along this edge too. It's just amazing little effect that you get with just a very little amount of paint in there. But I still do want to grab some more of that. Some more of that Naples on this right side of this bulb. I'm actually just dipping the tip onto the paper a little bit, like modeling it, or it's like pointillism. But because the paper is wet right there already, it's just bleeding into it, creating a nice little wash. It's going to be a little unpredictable. I'm okay with that. Just going to grab some of that red, some of that gray. I'm going to keep that really loose because it's down in the shadows. Grab some more of this gray here. Start, oops, drop it on myself and start to add it right down here. Darken this whole area up. So we're very lucky. We're at a great time in history to be a watercolorist, to be using watercolor in our mixed media work, because pigment is stronger and there's more of it than there ever has been in history. If you go back and look at early watercolors in the 17 or 1800s, look at some of the British watercolorists, it looks very soft, almost foggy, right? And that is because traditionally watercolor was a sketching medium. You'd be using it to do your preliminary, we didn't have iPhones to take pictures of things. You'd be doing your preliminary sketches in watercolor and take that back to your studio and make your paintings. So they wanted it to be fast and really just get the essence of what they were looking at. But now we want full paintings of it. So what that means is where they used to use a minimal amount of pigment, think of it more as like a wet pencil. Now we're adding a lot of pigment to watercolor as manufacturers. No matter what brands you're using, if it's an artist grade brand, they're using a lot of pigment in there, as much as they can fit. And so we get to see such intense colors, and we don't have to layer some of those. If you look at Turner or John Cotman or any of those, uh, they had hundreds and hundreds of thin veils of color in order to achieve those colors that they got. It's just very soft, soft paint. And I kind of think of that when I'm doing my initial lay-in of some of these softer colors. And as the washes are building in together, but then you start to see the intensity build out. Colors really get wild. Does anybody have any questions about Fabriano paper, Sennelier paint, Raphael brushes? Everybody's having too much fun
Yeah, I
playing.
think everyone's super involved in their paintings.
I love that. And I love the idea of painting things like bulbs. I do this a lot. You know, there's this idea that as an abstract painter might just think of anything or start scribbling on a sheet of paper, but that's not always true. You know, a lot of painters, it's hard to be inspired by nothing, right? We can't just have a blank mind. We can't go meditate and then think of what we want to paint. Sometimes it works that way, but not always. And so sometimes we have a little writer's block. And so things like still lifes can be an inspiration for something that's really, really emotional. We can really find within ourselves. And so using something as simple as, a bag of garden bulbs or a stack of soil if we're thinking of springtime still. Your compost heap might be a great inspiration. Uh, Pile of dirty laundry is always fun because there's so many colors and textures and patterns. So if you don't want to do laundry next week or tonight or whenever you have it scheduled, just say, no, that's a still life. We need to leave it right where it is. A bit of the blooming over in here. And I haven't decided yet if I want to keep it. So I'm going to keep it for now, but I don't know if we'll continue to keep it. Let's make this yellow in here. Haven't used much of this hooker's green yet. And green is can be kind of a scary color for me because it gets a little, it can jump out at you, it can become a lot. So I'm just going to use a little light bit of green here. This bulb is to kind of create some of the segmentation that that bulb's got going on. I want to add that green in a few other spots just because it looks, when it's on its own like that, it looks a little strange. So what if I add a little bit, even though it's not really in there? Again, we're the boss of our painting, so add a little bit in here where this kind of root formation is on this. It's not a bulb, I can't remember what it's called. If any of you guys are also gardeners out there, this not bulb.
Um, Andrew, Jackie is saying, I knew that the Rose Opera was fugitive, but I'm surprised to see Hooker's Green listed as NR. How long does Hooker's last before fading?
The hooker's green is going to be okay. Good question. So if you're looking at your color swatch or your dot card, let's talk about that for just a sec while I wait for some things to dry. So you're going to see a few different things on here. So we'll start with See if I can get in focus. Focus. There, close enough. So you'll see the color itself. You'll see 501 is Sennelier's color designation, the name of the color. Then below that, you'll see, in this case, and get back in focus, an empty box. There we go. An empty box. I won't put my fingers in front of it. It throws it off. So the empty box means that it's a transparent color. Next to that, you'll see the 2 in Roman numerals for lemon yellow. Now, 2 is the light fastness designation. 1 is amazing. 2 is great. 3 is good. Beyond 3, you'll see an NR or not rated, or an X, or all kinds of different designations people will put if they don't want to tell you if it's a 1, 2, or 3. Then beyond that is this PY3. So in this case, it's pigment yellow, and it's the 3rd. So I believe this is a Hansa yellow for lemon yellow, some kind of a Hansa yellow. Now in this card, you'll see there's 3 asterisks after that. That's Sennelier's personal light fastness designation. So in Sennelier, so the 2 is what the laboratory for that general pigment in general is telling you the light fastness is. So Hansa yellow in all uses could be a 2, which is a great, right? Great. But Sennelier says in our testing, in everything we've done, we find that our version of this color lasts longer. So we give it a 3 because that's our best. So we say it's more light fast, right? Is what they're saying. So if we take with that information and we go down to Hooker's green, what this is going to tell me is, let's see, that focus for me. Let's try to tease it. Okay, I gotta stay far away. Sorry, guys. So this is going to tell me that, try to get it on the phone so I can see what you see. 809 is Hooker's green. The name is Hooker's green. It's transparent. The designation for these 2 colors mixed together is not rated. So these 2 colors mixed together has not been evaluated by ASTM. But it is the Aerolite yellow, which I know to be very light fast, and PG36, I might be spacing out on a little bit as to what green that is. I'll have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure that's a very light fast green. So if you look at Sennelier's designation, they say, oops, it's got 3 asterisks, which again is their best. So they're saying we don't have an ASTM designation for the light fastness of this mixture. It hasn't been tested for that, but we say it's extremely light fast. Now to use the Opera Rose as another example of that, 659 Opera Rose, transparent. It is not rated, not designated, because it's got that fluorescent pigment in there. Then it's also got, I believe that's some quinacridone in there. And then they give it 1 asterisk because they say this one's not rated because it's got the fluorescent and it is fugitive. It's not light fast. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use it or you might not want to use it. It means if you paint a painting and hang it across from a kitchen window that's south facing, you might see some fading. If you paint a painting, you love Opera Rose, and you put it under museum glass that has some kind of UV protection, that is going to last for a good long time. If you spray it with a varnish that's got some UV protection, that's going to last a good long time. So they're just being completely open about how light fast these colors are. They want to give you as much information as possible. But that doesn't mean that it's a given that it's going to fade. You're not going to, you're not going to hang this up and it's going to fade overnight. So I still use opera rose. I just know if I have a lot of opera rose in my painting, that I'm going to want to give it some kind of a UV protection, give it a little love. It might need to be framed behind UV glass. Uh, the fluorescence in there is, using a pigment that is a dye, or it's not a pigment, it's a dye that is super luminous, but can't last the test of time. Now, if we look at museums, certainly there's examples of people using fluorescent pigments that have lasted because, if a museum or a collector wants something to last, they're going to take care of it. They're going to know not to hang it in front of a bright window. They might have it, in a room in a museum or a collection or in a house where there's a little less natural light coming in. They may put it in a frame that has some UV glass. So if we think of people like Andy Warhol having screen prints that are using fluorescent pink and fluorescent yellow, uh, those have lasted because the museum wants them to last. So it's all about the collectors taking care of the painting. Uh, I talk about this a lot with things like pastels and oil pastels. People say, can't it get damaged? Certainly anything can get damaged. I mean, we know that from our homes, our furniture, dropping a glass, anything can get damaged. But if people take care of it, if they hold it as precious to themselves, then they're going to know how to take care of it too. Uh, but to answer that question more directly, that Hooker's Green is just not tested for its light fastness from the ASTM standard. So Sennelier says it's extremely light fast. I do trust them. They've been doing this for 130 plus years. Uh, so they know which pigments they're putting out there, and they're not going to say that they believe it to be light fast and have artists come back to them and be frustrated. Or angry. So if they say that, they give it their 3 asterisks, which is their best, then I think that's fantastic. I think that's good. Good enough for me. Hope that helps. But yes, the opera rose, if I were to leave this like this, hang it in a south facing window over the course of a couple years, that would become much more subtle. Now, for any of us who work in sketchbooks, uh, sketchbooks are really fantastic too because you can use anything in a sketchbook and you're keeping it closed. So when I'm working in sketchbooks, I might use materials that aren't even designed for artwork because I know it's going to last in a sketchbook. And then for my finished paintings, anything that's in the, you know on paper, going to be framed on canvas, any of that, I'm a little more cautious. But I also think, and this is my personal view, not the view of any of the brands that I'm playing with. I think we're a little bit overly cautious sometimes as artists. We are in a time and place where we have a lot more knowledge than we ever did, so we're much more careful. But if you think about artists through history, like Jasper Johns, he didn't know what was going to happen when he was using lead and house paint and caustic wax and all of those things. Uh, or Robert Rauschenberg painting on bed sheets. Sheets are not archival. I was talking to somebody recently about a Rembrandt painting that's on paper. That's from a time in history when paper was not archival. So he went out on a limb. He knew, hey, paper can easily degrade, but I'm going to do this painting on there, and it's still hundreds and hundreds of years later. The museums have that little piece of paper with a Rembrandt portrait on it, and he didn't think it was going to last, I'm sure, but we won't know until we experiment. So I think there's a lot of things we as artists can do that we get a little fearful of sometimes. But the paper we have nowadays, the paints, the pigments, everything is the best it's ever been for artists, as long as we're buying artist grade stuff. I'm throwing in a little bit of that turquoise down here because I keep playing, keep keep painting, keep playing. and that blue is sinking away from me just a little bit. So I wanted the turquoise to make itself more known. Turquoise down here. Hopefully it'll pick up some of the blue that's left back in the background. Lots more of this Payne's gray. Because this spot, I like that that pink is in there, but I want it to be a little bit more like a blob, a little three-dimensional, like an onion. Really great question about light fastness. I am going to set that aside for just a moment because I feel like I've been playing on this soft press. I'll come back to it. I don't feel like it's a finished painting just yet. I am going to leave all that white space in there though. I really do feel like I like having this just chunk of color in the corner and then a little room to breathe around it in this case. Not always, but and because it's not 100% representational, once I'm finished, I can turn it, I can decide how it's going to look. Is it going to, do people need to know that it is what it is? How am I going to title it? I don't know. We'll find out. We'll come back to that in just a minute. But I do want to talk a little bit more about the papers too. Because with watercolor, with many mediums we can work on anything. With watercolor, we we work on paper. And the paper really has tremendous amount of meaning, shows how the painting is going to finish. So if we see a painting on cheap paper, doesn't I mean with watercolor you can really tell. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Is with a lot of mediums you can fight the surface, you can cover it up. With watercolor, the surface is what you see. It's going to continue to be there. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. So if I get more of that Chinese orange that I love so much, I'm just going to swatch it out. Right now I'm working on the hot press. And then we go over to the cold press. Get a little opera rose in my Chinese orange. So if it looks a little pink on screen, that's why. Then I'm going over to the rough. Okay. So we can see how these three surfaces are going to respond for us. We know the soft press. I've been playing with the soft press for an hour. But if I were to take, let's just do one brush stroke, Payne's gray on each. Now as this dries, I'll pull them closer. But I'm also going to get some more of this quinacridone red. I'm going to start to come in from a different side. I want to see how those things respond when I bump them into each other. And then we'll let that dry. Now I'm going to pull them closer to the camera wet, and then we'll set them aside. And then I want to come back to our lifting experiment that we did a few minutes ago. So you can see already that those three surfaces, hot, cold, rough, have a very different look as the paint is even starting to dry. Once it's dry, it'll have even more variance. So set that aside. Come back to our lifting experiment. So what I want to do with a lifting experiment is I'm going to draw a line with clear water. Do the same thing here. Draw a line with clear water. Do the same thing down here. Draw a line, some clear water. I'm going to take my paper towel. Now this one, my clear water started to spread. This wasn't 100% dry, so it didn't have the effect I was going for, but close. We still got a little lifting. Okay. Now this one, I didn't let it sit long enough. This one I didn't let it sit long enough. So let's try again. Again with the line with the clear water. Again with the line with the clear water.
Well,
So
Andrew, we do have a question about the brushes from Patricia. Other than round brushes, what shape brushes do you recommend for beginners?
for watercolor, rounds are the most common by far. Having a flat or two in just a small size, is I have a flat here I haven't used, but I have it sitting aside for me. Having a flat can be handy if you want to have some sharp edges. Uh, Rounds are very common. Just those are the two primaries for watercolor, round and flat. If you want to have a little more fun, you could dive into something like a dagger brush is a lot of fun to play with. Uh, but until you get into heavy bodied paint, keep it pretty simple. Acrylics and oils, there's a lot of different brush shapes and styles. With watercolor, a handful of rounds and a handful of flats, and you should be good for pretty much anything that you need to or want to paint. So what I'm seeing from my experiment here is we can get a little lifting once it's dry. And if I keep doing that over and over, I'll be able to get it lifted. But it's much easier, as we saw down here in this corner, or right here in this splotch, or right here in this splotch, much easier to lift while the paint is wet. So the quicker you can respond to something you don't like, the easier it's going to be.
And you're just using a paper towel,
I am just using
Andrew?
paper towel, yeah. And I'll do it again just to see how things go. And we'll let that water sit on there for a minute. Now I've got days worth of paint still left on this palette if I clean it up a little bit. We've hardly touched any of this paint. Pretty thrilled at how much we got here. So technically, for any of you out there who are starting with watercolor or starting with Sennelier and want to start using some other paints, you have these 10 colors. You could choose a handful of other colors that you want to try and just use these for a little while. You can add in more blues, you can add in more reds, whatever suits your fancy or whatever you plan to be painting. I'm gonna let that bleed just to see what happens. Put this in here. Up just a bit. Turn it on its side. And still using the reference photo as inspiration, we have that brown paper in the background. That brown paper in the background has these little crinkles coming out of it. So do just a little bit of that. So I fibbed. I'm not keeping quite as much white space as I promised, but I'm going to keep some of that white space still. Just going to have some washes coming out of this. So it's a little bit more amorphic, maybe is a good word for that, or natural. Yeah, rounds are key. We've done this whole painting so far with one single round. A round can be really versatile. You can treat it like a pencil tip almost, or a pen tip. Uh, but if I were going to start to use my flat, let's see what happens. So I could start to pull in bigger areas quicker.
Patricia's asking if your black is dried, how can it be corrected?
Once it's dry, it's pretty tough, especially if it's a staining color. And that Payne's gray has some blue in it, which makes it even a little more challenging to lift. So if I wanted to get rid of that little dot, let's see what we can do. It might just take perseverance. It might take wanting or to deciding to leave it there and figure out how to work with it. One of the things about watercolor is uh, it can be very unforgiving with certain colors. And so we have to take the unexpected and manage it. So in this case, I have a little droplet of water sitting on there. I'm going to let that droplet sit for a little while, see what happens. We'll come back to it in just a second. In the meantime, I'm going to add some of that Payne's gray into these crinkly areas that I'm kind of imagining. And yes, I have the painting upside down. I'm looking at the reference image right side up, but it doesn't need to be perfect for me. So I'm able to kind of imagine, and I can flip flop if I want. Now, if you have your reference image digitally, one cool thing that I'll do sometimes to help me get things a little more abstracted, a little bit looser, if I'm starting to feel like I'm getting too tight, because I prefer not to tighten up. I feel like I lose a little something if I tighten up. Sometimes I'll zoom in on an image or I'll flip it, on my iPhone. I'll turn it upside down before I start painting it because you're looking at it with different eyes. So I can take still my big brush. Because it's bigger, I can add in a little bit more swaths of color, right? Right. A clean paper towel here. I'm gonna try. We've had a minute with this little dot that we're playing with to see if we can get rid of it. Get rid of it. So I've softened it. Softened it quite a bit. We'll go back and try again. Now, if I keep doing this, eventually the paper is going to get tired, right? The paper doesn't like to be scrubbed at for a really long time. You can get quite a bit out of a really strong paper like Fabriano Artistico. Some papers, if you're using something out of like a mixed media pad or something, uh, by now the paper would be really tired of me beating up on it. So it might say no. It might start to pill up on you. It might start to look like it's been sanded. Uh, so sometimes you just can't manage something if you're trying to get rid of it. With a good paper, you can do a little more. But in this case, I would say that is pretty well stained there. So if I wanted to get rid of it, I would have to be a little more creative uh, with what I want to do to it. Like the shadow from this bag maybe is going to start to get over into it. Reduce its effect, that little droplet. Or I could really lean into it. I can grab a whole bunch more of that same pigment, same color, let that kind of bloom in there. See what happens if we lean into it. But that lifting can be a great technique as it's wet. But we also holding things precious can sometimes make it harder to paint. So I think also I like to have multiple paintings going at once. If I was in my studio, I might have 3 or 4 versions of this going that I can play back and forth with. And that way, you're like, oh, I'm trying to achieve a painting, but I have 3 paintings going. And at the end of the day, often I'll have 3 paintings that I like, or I'll set aside and I'll end up liking them the next day. So sometimes you may think you want to lift something, but living with it for a little while can be fun.
Elisa is asking, what is the best way to flatten a finished painting that has buckled from water?
With a strong paper, it will self flatten to a certain extent. Like this painting, I have some little ripples here. Uh, by tomorrow or the next day, that'll flatten somewhat. I can set it inside of a sketchbook and flatten it out. If I'm painting really big, I'll actually wet my paper before I start painting and tape it down and let it dry. And that reduces that. But the old trick of just putting a whole bunch of books on it, that works pretty well too. Works to an extent. Uh, you can always mist really gently. I mean, exceedingly gently. Mist the back of the paper if it's clean, and then put the books on it, and that will kind of the humidity will help it flatten out. But for smaller stuff, just the books. Don't worry too much about it. Uh, and I often just don't even worry if there's little ripples in there. I'll store it and I'll leave it like that. Over time, it just tends to flatten itself out pretty well. Time's the best medicine. So have I used all of the colors? I think I have. I think I could use maybe a little more green in there though. I feel like, these are living little creatures in there, right? Living little bulbs. So let's give them a little more life, even if there's not a lot in the source image. I'm gonna make them a little more lively. Just hints of some green. And then we have a little fourth bulb hidden over here. Let's add a little. Payne's Gray. I love playing with this Payne's Gray. One of my favorites. Sennelier makes some really great neutrals. Payne's Gray, neutral tint, warm gray, cool gray. Some of my favorites. We created a whole nocturne palette of all the grays and blacks at one point. And it's just so much fun to work with. Just grays and blacks. And if I keep it loose like this, I can leave it loose, or I can come back to it tomorrow with some colored pencils or some microns or some gouache or more watercolor. But if I'm being honest, I think I really starting to like this painting just how it is. don't know that I'll actually do anything to it. Which is rare. Demos often turn into something else for me, so I appreciate all of you spending time with me while I'm painting a painting that I actually am going to keep the way it is. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we are nearing the end, and we do like to do a gallery view, just giving everyone a little warning in a couple minutes once Andrew gets finished up here, and we can do a little show and tell on screen. So if you'd like to share, you can get ready and get your camera ready. We'll do that in a minute or two. Any last questions? Add to the chat. Andrew, are there certain things that you look for in your painting to tell you when you're finished or almost finished with it?
You know, that is a good question. When I start feeling like I'm overworking it, like I get this sense that it's actually a question in my head. Do I want to do that? Like I'll go to make another mark. I might have my brush all ready and dip it in the paint, and then I'll go to set it down and I'll say, do I want to do that or do I not want to do that? And even if it's a question, then it's not a question anymore. Once I say it's not intuitive for me to set it down, then I say I must be done. So I try to stop before I know it's time to stop because often I can get caught up in the inertia of it and just keep painting and painting and painting just for the sake of painting. So another trick I have for that is having blank paper near me. If I have another sheet of paper near me, then in the studio I might have 3 or 4 sheets of paper on the table or pinned to the wall, and I'll be working on one painting and I'll go to touch, and I'll have that question in my head and I'll go back over here and I'll say, maybe I want to start doing another painting, similar similar feel. And then if I go to get the paint again and I go to touch, hey, I have this painting over here that I'm working on. Let's add it to this. And then I start to move this one out of the way. So it's more of that once that question mark is in my head, if I should make a mark, I know more or less that the painting needs to be set aside. Uh, and then tomorrow, I it's often not that I feel like it's finished. It's more that I feel like it's finished for that day. And I say, I'll look at it again tomorrow. And I come back tomorrow and I say, oh, I actually don't feel like that needs anything else. So that it goes into a drawer, a file, or a frame, and I know it's done. But it's more that question of whether I should do something. And anytime that's a question, I just don't do it. If I'm wondering, then it can wait till tomorrow.
Awesome.
Good question.
Okay, if you don't mind, if everyone wants to turn their cameras on and share on screen, you can change to gallery view and you can see everyone else's work.
Ooh, I
Please
can't wait.
share. Please share what you made. Oh,
Beautiful.
oh, the colors are so pretty, Patricia. Nice. Tom and Sharon. Just add all you guys so everyone can see. Yay.
I love these.
Very nice.
This is fantastic.
Just a couple more seconds. I just want to make sure everyone can see. This is so great. And they all look so different. Everyone interprets it a little bit different.
I love that. I love that they're all so different. They are amazing. I would love to see a gallery show of all of these paintings.
Mm. Yeah, very cool.
Love.
Beautiful.
Nice, everyone.
Awesome. Great. Okay, if there's any other questions, we have like a couple more minutes. Add them to the chat, or Andrew, if there's any last minute notes about Sennelier or Raphael or
I think we covered so much of it. I've been having so much fun talking while I'm painting that if you all have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. I'd love to do this again with y'all and answer more questions as they come up.
Mhm.
Those were such beautiful paintings. I really would love to see a gallery show of all those. That was fantastic. And the way the colors were used in different ways. So out of these 10 colors, there was just an infinite spectrum of color that was created from everybody.
Julie asked, how do you get to abstraction? I'm a pretty literal painter.
Just keeping it loose, Sometimes I was working with somebody who switched to bigger and bigger brushes over time, and that was their goal was to keep their brush marks larger. Another person I met was very, very focused on making things look literal, and they created a plan in their head to try and create a painting with as few brush marks as possible. So one of their uh, experiments was to have a still life, much like this, and to say, how can I do this with just 10 brush strokes? Or how can I just do this with 5 brush strokes? And they would start by doing that as an experiment. And over time, it actually turned into a massive collection of work that was just beautiful. So creating little games for yourself can be a really fun way to experiment with color and form.
Right?
Uh, so deconstructing is a good way. That's how I kind of like to think of it. Is I'll look at things from life sometimes, and I'll deconstruct them into just their simplest, basic form, and it doesn't even have to look like what I'm looking at.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much, Andrew, for joining us today. It was really great to see an abstract piece and um, all the colors with Sennelier, learning about how that paint is made together and everything. So thank you so much. Hope to have you again soon, and um, hope everyone enjoyed, and hope to see you on the next one. Have a
Thank you.
great day,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye.